Jumping right back into the action on some more quarterback discussions here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Hawaiian 5-0, how you doing? Welcome to the show. But talking some more about quarterbacks in a way, but on their decision making. Talking about Geno Smith. What he said recently caught my eye for a different reason. Basically, with training camp now in full swing, you see a lot of players wearing the funny looking covers on their helmets that make their heads look twice or triple the size that it usually does. The Guardian caps is what they're called, and that was basically implemented a few years ago by the NFL in this wave of player safety, trying to keep everybody healthy, not taking as many unnecessary hits, you could say, during practice to injure them, and then they don't get to play in games, and that does no good for anybody, obviously. So that became a requirement, basically, for the NFL a few years ago. Now the players always wear them, at least the players that always have the risk of bumping heads with somebody else, like the defensive linemen, offensive linemen, cornerbacks. I've seen a few of them wear it, linebackers, running backs, all those sort of positions. Quarterbacks I'm sure can wear them, but they're not required as much for those positions. But it's funny, ironic that Geno Smith is the first person I've seen talk about this issue and considering wearing one of these Guardian caps in season here in 2024, because back in April, I want to say, the NFL passed this new mandate that it is an option now for NFL players to wear these Guardian caps in game, whereas before it was just limited to practices. You basically had to wear them in practice leading up to the game, making sure nobody was taking any unnecessary hits, keeping all your players healthy so they make it to Sunday. But now they decided that they could just make it an option for players to wear them in 2024. And even when they passed that, I know I mentioned it before in a YouTube short or on this show. Either way, I know I talked about it before, not considering it a real possibility, because I feel like the majority of the NFL players, not that they're against player safety, but they're not the most eager to follow all these rules. Or they'll follow them, but they're not really happy about it. And to think that anybody would wear it during the game seemed ridiculous to me. But now Geno Smith seems to be at least considering it at this point in time, because he mentioned it last Friday during training camp, talking to the media at those practices. He mentioned how this could be an option for him heading into 2024. And I wanted to think he was kidding, but at the same time, it didn't look like it. At some point, based on this statement, he said, "I've been thinking about wearing mine. I'm still debating on if I should wear my Guardian cap. I don't know yet, but obviously I hit a lot of people with my head, so I have to be careful out there." He kept it pretty plain and simple, didn't say too much afterwards on the topic, but I think he said enough there in that statement, honestly. Again, I thought he was being sarcastic because he mentioned hitting a lot of people with his head, but a quarterback doesn't really do that. They can do that if they hit the ground hard, they get slammed or something like that, and a defensive lineman bumps them in head-to-head contact, but defensive players aren't even allowed to do that really anymore. So how much is Geno Smith actually getting hit in the head? So that's why I thought this was a little bit of a joke, but we had to talk about it because I've never heard anybody actually bring it up to the media and as an actual possibility that this could happen. And of course, the Guardian caps, I think, are a good thing. They have helped in reducing the amount of head injuries, the concussions and things like that players may face during a 17-game season. And now that there's talks about, elongating that to 18 games, probably eventually 19 games, maybe even 20 games at some point. But with that being the case now, the NFL's kind of throwing it out there like, all right, well, you guys can wear them. You guys can do this if you want to, knowing that this could only benefit the NFL's push to increasing the amount of games to 18, 19 if more players start wearing these Guardian caps and making the NFL a safer sport. But we're going to get onto that topic in just a second. I wanted to bring up some of these sort of stats that benefit the brain injury law center, wearing these Guardian caps and reducing the severity of some of these hits and impacts by the helmets without wearing these Guardian caps now. According to Brain Injury Law Center, wearing the Guardian cap can reduce the severity of impact by about 10%. If two players got them, it's at least 20%, obviously doubling up there. And to jump onto that, bring up more topics on that, you got the NFL Executive Vice President, Jeff Miller, who oversees player health on the NFL and just on his duties of doing that. He said that last year there has been a 52% decrease in concussions suffered by players with the Guardian caps on compared to previous seasons with 3 years in the past before that, compared to those stats and how they compared to that. There has been a 52% decrease on that, so that's a pretty promising sign on the Guardian caps and how they benefited up until this point. So that's not really the issue that I'm trying to bring up. That's always a positive thing. The Guardian caps are going to be a great thing for players in reducing it, but kind of inching it towards now being in the NFL in the regular season games is where I kind of bring up this question: is it almost too far now, pushing it towards player safety? Touchy subject, because I don't want this to come across like I don't want players to be safe out there. This should be a barbaric game. It should be hard-nosed. Everybody's saying that football is a tough-nosed sport. Why would the NFL try to implement these rules, or why is the NFL limiting players from hitting? That always seems to be brought up by, I think, the older generation, and I'm not trying to sound like that right now, but in the same breath, I do still want to keep some sort of idea that the NFL, that football is a hard game, to play. It's a hard game. It should be a dangerous game in some aspect for some of these players. It's not an easy sport. It's a dangerous sport in that aspect, and they're just trying to make it in a situation where the NFL is completely going in a different direction. I think it's a weird thing. Like I mentioned, I don't want to bring up player safety too much, like I'm totally against it, but the Guardian caps, I believe, are a good thing. It should be a positive thing for these players. But again, talking about this, I don't think it should be to a point where it should be required by any sense. I have no problem if Geno wants to wear it, is considering wearing it just because he wants to be safe. But I feel like in this push for player safety now, the looming question of the NFL trying to implement 18 games, maybe 19 games, just trying to make this bigger, I feel like this is just an introduction into almost making it a requirement. No, I'm thinking ahead to how the NFL could play this out in a way, just because now they're introducing it as an option. So how much longer is it going to be before they almost make it a requirement? And then at that point, it almost really just becomes a weird thing with the NFL, where now they're almost just trying not to make it football, right? If that makes sense. You're going to hear a lot of players complaining about it if it becomes a requirement, and that's definitely a long ways away from ever happening. This is just the beginning steps, but I'm sort of projecting now, seeing where the NFL is really coming from by making this an optional thing. And it could be a benefit, like I said, if Geno wants to wear it. Someone like Tua, who has suffered from injuries to his head already early on, that can be understandable if they want to consider wearing it. Maybe they wear it a game, they don't for a couple weeks, and they wear it again. Maybe they wear it coming off of a head injury, something like that. That makes sense, but I think that's as far as it should go. I don't want this going to a point where, again, it's a requirement by the NFL. And now Geno, again, has put it out there in the air now, so I wouldn't be surprised if more players come out and say that maybe they're considering it, or maybe that they are going to do it at some point. So now we're getting closer into this area where the NFL can push player safety even more in order to get those extra games, 18 games, 19 games in a season, which is where I think this will ultimately go, but I hope it doesn't become a requirement for these players. Also, with the NFL also working with helmet design manufacturers recently, they've already started to design these new helmet designs, these new helmet models, basically to protect against head injuries already. So I don't know, if you're doing that, you're going to the lengths of that already. I don't feel like the Guardian caps necessarily should be brought into the regular season. That's just how I feel about it. If you're trying in other areas to make it safe, why still make the Guardian caps a requirement? That's one thing. Also, like I said, I think it would be too far in one direction of trying to be over safe with the NFL. Really not making it football anymore at that sense. Basically playing with a pillow on your head. You're already taking away enough rules from the defensive side of the ball, really, to make it a lot safer. So this would just really be overdoing it, in my opinion. But the last thing I would say, just on a more lighthearted note, I don't think people would take the NFL as serious anymore if they had these guardian caps on their head. It would almost, I don't want to say it becomes a joke, the NFL becomes a joke or anything like that, but it just looks funny. It just looks ridiculous, and they could try to customize them or make them look cool, I guess, but it's not the same, obviously, with wearing that thing on your head, covering up the logos. Of course, they could put it on the outside of the cap, but again, it just doesn't look the same. Their heads overall already look a little bigger with the helmet on. You make it look a little bit more, even more bigger. It looks funny. It just looks weird. It's something that when you look at it through the TV, it almost looks comical in a way, and I don't think the NFL wants to portray that image really out there to everybody else watching the NFL, looking onto it. I think that's also another reason why this really shouldn't go too much further than just being an option, but it's out there now. Geno Smith was the first player I've seen to talk about it. I'll probably expect more players to talk about it, honestly, but we'll see how this kind of snowballs and how quickly it picks up, honestly, over the next few weeks, months heading into 2024. But certainly something interesting that I was not expecting seeing on my feed in these recent days. But who knows? We're going to see where it goes from there. But on that note, we're going to move on to the next set of topics on today's show, talking about Deebo Samuel wanting to try out his hand on kickoffs in 2024, and Micah Parsons making some more comments regarding Malik Hooker and his comments that he made on Micah Parsons' focus level in regards to football and focusing on his own podcast with Bleacher Report. That builds on after Micah Parsons' latest comments. We're going to get to those two after we take a short break here. We'll be right back after this.
Looking